April 12th, 1981. A bright spring morning in the Sierra Nevada mountains. 14-year-old Sheila Sharp walked across the gravel between two cabins at Keddie Resort, a rundown cluster of wooden houses in a tiny mountain with one road in and one road out. She'd spent the night at her friend's place next door, Cabin 27. Now she's heading home to Cabin 28 to change her clothes for church. She opens the front door. Her mother is on the living floor, bound, beaten, covered in blood. A 15-year-old brother, John, is beside her. His friend Dana Wingate is next to him. All three of them are tied with electrical cord and medical tape. They have been beaten with a hammer, stabbed with knives. The walls are streaked with blood. The phone is on the hook. The curtains are drawn. Sheila roars. She doesn't scream. She can't. She just turns back and sprints back to Cabin 27, back to the neighbor's house and collapses. When the police arrive, they find something that makes the scene even harder to understand. In a back bedroom, just through a thin wall from the massacre, three young boys are still in bed. Eric 10, Greg 5, and their friend Justin 12. All three are alive, unharmed. They say they slept through the whole thing. But there's someone missing. Dana Sharp, 12 years old, Sue's younger daughter. She was home that night. She was in that cabin when whatever happened started. She's gone, and she won't be found for 3 years. This is Beyond the Case, and once you hear the full story, you'll never see it the same way again. But before we continue, please subscribe. But to understand how family ended up in that cabin, we need to go back to Connecticut, back to a woman who thought she was saving her children by running. Gianna Susan Sharp, everyone called her Sue, was born in Springfield, Massachusetts in 1945. She married young, had 5 kids, and by the late 1970s, she was trapped in a marriage that had turned violent, and her husband James was abusive. Sue endured it for years, and then one day, she did. In the summer of 1979, Sue packed all of her 5 children, John 15, Sheila 14, Tina 12, Rick 10, and little Greg 5, and left. She drove across country from Connecticut to California, where brother Don lived near the town of Quincy in the Sierra Nevada mountains. She rented a small trailer at first. Money was impossibly tight. She was living on $250 a month stipend from the Navy. James was a veteran, her husband, plus food stamps and whatever she could earn from odd jobs and a federal education system. But Sue made it work. She always made it work. In the fall of 98, she found something better, a cabin at the Keddie Resort, a fading mountain community about 6 miles from Quincy. 33 rustic cabins along a stretch of railroad track, tucked into the pines. Rent was about $170 a month. The place had seen better days, but for Sue, it was space, room for the kids, a front porch, mountains out every window. Cabin 28 had actually been the home of the local sheriff before the Sharps moved in. It was bigger than the trailer and it felt like a step up. The kids started making friends. John, oldest boy, was 15. A little cocky but full of energy, the way teenage boys are. His best friend, a kid named Dana Wingate, 17, who'd had a rough go of it. A ward of the state on probation, but a good kid at heart. Tina was 12, white, private, the kind of girl who had secret hiding places in the woods where she'd go to be alone. Sheila was 14 and social. Dick and Greg were just kids, being kids in the mountains. For a family that had fled abuse with nothing, this was paradise. Pine trees taller than buildings, trails to hike, streams to fish, a town so small that everyone knew everyone. And that's the thing about Keddie, everyone knew everyone. Two cabins down in cabin 26 lived the Smart family. Martin Smart Marty was a Vietnam veteran who had been in and out of the psychiatric unit in Veno. He was married to Marilyn, who had a son named Justin from previous relationship. Living with the Smarts was a man named John. Everyone called him Bo. He had met Marty at the V hospital. Bo was an ex-convict with alleged ties to the organized crime in Chicago. He used at least 2 known aliases and he developed a thing for Sheila Sharp. He'd asked out her twice and she turned him down both times. So picture the situation: a single mother, surrounded by her kids, trying to build a new life. Tudor Town, a volatile man with PTSD, whose wife she'd been encouraging to leave. And his house guest, a man with more connection, who didn't like being told no. And between them, a 12-year-old boy named Justin would spend the night in cabin 28 on the worst night any of them would ever know. Saturday, April 11th, 1981. A regular day at the Keddie Resort. Sue, Sheila and Greg had spent the morning visiting friends, the Meeks family. On the way back, they picked up Rick from basketball tryouts from Quincy. They also spotted John and Dana hitchhiking along the canyon road and gave them a ride home. That afternoon, John and Dana hitched back into Quincy. There was a party, maybe friends to see. They'd come home later. By evening, the household had settled into the usual pattern. Sheila made plans to sleep over at the Seabold's place next door, cabin 27. Just 15 feet away, she left around 8 o'clock. Tina had been hanging at the Seabold's too, watching TV. But around 9:30, she asked what time it was and headed home. She wanted to stay over at 27, but Sue said no, come home. So Tina went back to cabin 28. Justin Smart, Marty's 12-year-old stepson, was staying the night with Rick and Greg. The 3 boys were in the bedroom. Sue was home. John and Dana returned sometime between 10 o'clock and 1 in the morning. Nobody is exactly sure when. At some point after midnight, neighbors in the cabin next to the shop heard sounds. Muffled screams, groans, the kind of sounds you convince yourself you didn't really hear, because the alternative is too frightening. A woman and her boyfriend nearby cabin walked around 1:30 a.m. They listened. They went back to sleep. Nobody called the police. Nobody knocked on the door. That was the last night cabin 28 was just a home. Sunday morning, April 12th. Sheila walks back to cabin 28 just after 8 o'clock. She's going to change for church. The front door is closed. She opens it. The living room is destroyed. Blood on the walls, blood on the floor. The furniture is displaced. In the middle of it, 3 people. A mother, Sue, her brother John and Dana. All 3 of them are bound, wrist and ankle wrapped in electrical cord and medical tape. Sue and John have been beaten with a hammer and stabbed repeatedly. Dana has been beaten and strangled. The violence was extreme, prolonged. These were quick deaths. The telephone had been taken off the hook. Every light in the house is off. The curtains are pulled shut. Whoever did this didn't want the outside world to see in or hear out. Sheila runs back to cabin 27. The Seabolds call for help. Jamie Seabold, along with Sheila and possibly Zunita Seabold, goes back into cabin 28 to get the 3 young boys out. Rick, Greg, Justin. Pulled it through a side bedroom window. All 3 are alive. All 3 say they were asleep. All 3 say they heard nothing. Through a thin wall in a 4-room cabin, a woman and 2 teenagers were beaten, bound, and murdered. And 3 children in the next room didn't wake up. Investigators arrive. They confirm 3 dead. They recover weapons from the sea, 2 knives and a hammer, all covered in blood. But they notice something else. Tina is gone. She was home that night. She'd come back from the Seabolds at 9:30. Her bed had been slept in, but she's not in the cabin. She's not in the yard. She's not anywhere. Someone took her. Investigators believed she was led out the back door during or after the attack, taken alive by someone who, for whatever reason, could not afford to leave her behind. What happened next should have been a straightforward homicide investigation. 3 victims, physical evidence, a small community where everyone knew everyone. Weapons left at scene, a missing child. Instead, what happened was one of the most botched investigations in California criminal history. The Plumas County Sheriff called the California Department of Justice for help. The DOJ sent 2 agents, not from their homicide unit, but from the organized crime unit, Special Agents Harry Brady and P.A. Krim. Why the organized crime division was sent to a cabin murder in a mountain town with population under 100 has never been adequately explained, unless you consider who lived 2 cabins away. Martin, Smart and Go were questioned almost immediately. Marty told investigators that a blue-handled claw hammer of his had been gone missing. The murder weapon found at the scene was a hammer. Marty and Bo said that they'd been at a bar together that night from about 9:30 to 10. And after that, they went home. Both men had been seen at the bar earlier that evening, behaving strangely, wearing suits and ties in a place where nobody dresses like that. A witness later came forward saying he saw Marty burning clothes on the morning after the murders. No bloody clothing from the perpetrators was ever found at the scene. The 12-year-old boy in the back bedroom, Justin Smart, Marty's stepson, gave investigators conflicting stories. First, he said he dreamed details of the murder. Then under hypnosis, he described what he'd actually seen. 2 men in the cabin with Sue. John and Dana came home and confronted them. A fight. Then Tina was taken out of the back door by one of the men before he came back to finish the others. Based on Justin's description, composite sketches of 2 suspects were produced. But here's the thing. The sketches weren't drawn by an FBI forensic artist. They weren't drawn by anyone with training. They were drawn by a local amateur named Harlan Embry, a man with no artistic ability and no background in forensic sketching. With the FBI and Department of Justice both involved in the case, nobody could explain why they had used an untrained volunteer. And then it got worse. Shortly after the murders, Marty Smart left Keddie. It drove to Reno, Nevada. He started seeing a counselor at the Veteran Administration. In his 7th session, just weeks after the killing, Marty confessed. He told the therapist he killed Sue and Tina. His words, according to the counselor's recollection: "I killed the woman and her daughter, but I didn't have anything to do with the boys." The counselor reported it. He called DOJ. He asked for agents Bradley and Prim, the ones assigned to the case. He told them about the confession. The agents agreed to meet with him, and when they did, they dismissed it. They called it hearsay. A murder suspect confessed to the therapist. The therapist reported it to the law enforcement, and law enforcement called it hearsay and moved on. This wasn't the only evidence that got buried. Marty also wrote a letter to his wife Marilyn after leaving Keddie. In it, he wrote a line that investigators would later describe as one of the most incriminating statements that they'd ever seen in an unsolved case. He wrote, "I paid the price of your love, and now I bought it with 4 people's lives." That letter was given to the authorities. It was never entered into evidence. It was never admitted, never investigated, never followed up on. Investigator Mike Campbell, who reopened the case decades later, described it as having overlooked. Marty's wife, Marilyn, eventually gave the investigators a bloody jacket she'd kept. There's no record that it was ever entered into evidence either. Marty Smart was never arrested. Bo was never arrested. Both men left Plumas County shortly after the murders. Bo died in 1988. Marty died in 2000. Neither was ever charged. For 3 years, Tina Sharp was a missing person. The FBI treated her disappearance as a possible abduction. But no ransom demand ever came. No credible sightings materialized. She was 12 years old, quite private, the kind of girl who kept to herself. And she was gone. Then on April 22nd, 1984, almost exactly 3 years after the murder, a man collecting bottles in a remote wooded area of Butte County, about 60 miles from Keddie, found human remains, a skull, several other bones. Shortly after the discovery was announced, Butte County Sheriff's Office received a phone call. Anonymous, a man's voice. He said he'd been watching the news about the remains found near Feather Falls. And then he asked a question that sent a chill through the department. He asked whether they thought about the murder up in Keddie, the one where a 12-year-old girl was never found. The caller knew the remains belonged to Tina before investigators had confirmed it with dental records. He knew, and then he hung up. DNA analysis confirmed it. The remains were Tina's. Her cause of death could not be determined due to decomposition. Near the remains, searchers found a blue nylon jacket, pair of Levi's jeans, and an empty medical tape dispenser. The same kind of tape used to bind the victims in Cabin 28. The recording of that anonymous call was never admitted into evidence. It was found years later by investigator Mike Gamber, sitting at the bottom of the evidence box. Plumas County Sheriff later said something about Tina that reframes the entire case. He said she was central to why the murders happened. His exact reasoning: you kill 3 people in a cabin and leave the bodies to be discovered. But you take a 12-year-old girl with you. That means something about Tina could not be left behind, something about what she saw or what she knew or what she was to the person who took her made it impossible to leave there. For over 30 years, Keddie sat in boxes, untouched, unanswered. Then in 2013, Plumas County Sheriff Craig Hagwood and Special Investigator Mike Gamberg reopened it. Both men had personal connections to the case. Hagwood was a teenager in the area where murders happened. Gamberg had been a deputy before the killings and knew at least 2 of the victims personally. Dana Wingate had been at Gamberg's house the day before the murders. When they started going through the old evidence boxes, what they found was staggering. The anonymous caller recording, Perret, Marty's letter to Marilyn, never admitted as evidence. The counselor's report of Marty's confession, dismissed. Leads that were never followed, interviews that were never conducted, evidence that was never logged. In 2016, Gamberg got a tip. A man with a metal detector had found a blue-handled claw hammer at the bottom of a pond near the Keddie property. It matched the description of the hammer Marty Smart told the police missing in 1981. 35 years later, sitting at the bottom of a pond a stone's throw from the cabin where the investigators believe the killers live. In 2018, Gamberg announced something even more significant. DNA recovered from a piece of medical tape at the crime scene. The same tie used to bind the victims matched that of a non-living suspect. Hagwood has said publicly that he believes there were more than 2 people involved, that living individuals were accessories after the fact, that people in the community know more than they've said, and still no arrest, no charges, no justice. The Keddie Resort fell into despair over the decades. Tourists stopped coming. The town emptied out. Cabin 28 was condemned and demolished in 2004. The lot where it stood is just a patch of dirt now, surrounded by pine trees next to the railroad track. Investigator Gamberg put it simply: the murders filled the community. Keddie was finished. But here's what stays with me. Sheila Sharp left an abusive marriage and drove her 5 children across the country to start over. She found a cabin in the mountains. She scraped together $170 a month in rent, in food stamps, and a levy stipend. She made it work. She gave her kids a place to grow up where the trees were taller than the buildings and the streets ran clean, and the worst thing that was supposed to happen on a Saturday night was the older kids hitchhiking into a party in the next town. She did everything right. She got out, she started over, she built something. And then someone she knew walked through a door and took all of it away. Amit confessed to his therapist. The therapist reported it and later exists with a line that all but admits it. A hammer was found in a pond. DNA from the crime scene matches a living person. Witnesses saw the suspect burning clothes the morning after. And 44 years later, nobody has been charged. This case isn't unsolved because nobody knows what happened. It's unsolved because from the very first day, someone made sure it would be. If you believe stories like this deserve careful, honest telling, if you think forgotten cases should be kept alive until the people responsible are finally held to account, consider subscribing to Beyond the Case. 4 people were murdered in a cabin in the mountain. A 12-year-old girl was taken in the middle of the night and was found in the woods 3 years later. The prime suspect confessed. The evidence was buried in boxes. The fire chief Keddie Murders, the system that was supposed to protect this family, looked the other way. And Sheila Sharp, who was 40 years old when she opened that door, still waiting. She's been waiting her whole life, and to this day, no one has answered for what happened inside cabin 28.